Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen. I'm Barbara Peters, and tonight we have Asha Lemmie, a debut author whose book 50 Words for Rain is just absolutely wonderful. And Asha has been kind enough to sign all kinds of copies for us. Here's the copy of the book. It's perfectly beautiful. We still have some left. And joining us is Lisa C., my very dear friend, who we have been together for, let's see, 7 standalones and 3 mysteries, but we missed on Gold Mountain. Oh, well. Anyway, so Lisa, as I felt like having read Snowflower, that there were some really interesting questions that Lisa addressed and that Asha addresses, despite the fact that one country is China and one country is Japan, and there's at least 2 centuries difference. So we thought it'd be fun to explore that. Does that sound good, ladies?
Sounds great.
So let me just introduce Asha for a moment. Her book, 50 Words for Rain, is a Good Morning America Book Club pick, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and bestseller. It spans decades and continents with beautifully rendered characters. That's what I think, anyway. From an author who's only 26 years old and began this story, or at least some of it, at the age of 16, looking at themes like isolation, being an underdog, a girl who fit no box and is straddling 2 worlds, and most of all, wanted something to read that she couldn't find, so she thought she'd take that great advice and write it herself. Lisa C. is the author of 7 standalone historical novels, from Snowflower and the Secret Fan on up through The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, and recently, I'm going to get this wrong. Is it The Island of Lost Girls?
Island of Sea Women.
Island of Sea Women. I'm sorry. You know, I had a blank talking to Janet Ivanovich the other night. I couldn't remember what 26 was all about. And everybody watching it was trying to be helpful, but they all thought Janet couldn't remember it either. So I finally said, you know, it was a senior moment for both of us. And then Lisa wrote 3 wonderful mysteries, Flower Net, The Interior, and I'm going to do it again. What's the third one?
Don't ask me trick questions. We're waiting for those accounts to come in. Dragon Bones.
Thank you, Dragon Bones. Right. So now that I've established my senior credentials, here we go. So Asha, I was able to watch you.
Sorry? I actually have some questions, if it's okay. Could I start with Asha? Is that okay?
Take it away.
Yes. So I actually didn't realize that you had started this book when you were 16. That's amazing. So how did that happen? And, you know, how did you start thinking about it at the beginning? And was this just something you were doing in your bedroom, or, you know, was it something you started in class? How did that happen?
So I did start this in class, but not the appropriate class. I started this in physics class because I hated physics. And I needed to look like I was writing things down, even though I was not. I was writing the first 3 chapters of this story. And then I put it away. I didn't work on it really throughout college, but I was still thinking about it. And then when I graduated, I was kind of in a rut, and I remembered that I had started writing this story that I really liked, and I felt like I had done some growing up since high school, and I was in a position to kind of flesh it out more. And I spent the next 2 years finishing it, and then it took me another 2 years to find an agent and get published. And I'm sure you know how slow publishing is, but it was like 10 years start to finish, and I still can't really believe it's been that long. But I'm just like tickled that people actually read this.
So that's just amazing. First of all, 10 years, isn't that amazing, Barbara? That's just such a long time. But when you went back after you had, you know, written it in high school and then came back to it all those years later to those first 3 chapters, did you keep them pretty much intact, or did you change them a lot? With you know, how did that work? Because I can't imagine anything that I wrote when I was 16 that anyone would want to see it.
Well, I can't take too much credit, because most of the stuff I wrote at that age was not something that I would ever share with the public. But there was this one thing that I think maybe it was just meant to be. I kind of kept the first 3 chapters pretty much the same. The part that I rewrote about 12 times was the middle, because I knew how I wanted it to end, but I was not sure how to get there.
Well, if you just practically set up my question. Actually, for the people who haven't read the book yet, maybe you should talk just a little bit about what it's about.
Oh, sure. So 50 Words for Rain is a historical fiction coming of age novel about a young girl named Nori. Her mother is a Japanese aristocrat. Her father is an African American soldier, and she is born out of wedlock into a very prominent noble family who has lost some of their position after Japan loses World War II, and they're kind of grappling with the new reality. So I definitely think that this novel would appeal to people who like underdog stories. And there's also a very important sibling relationship in the book. Nori and her older half brother, Akira, their relationship is really like the driving force behind the events in this story.
And so again, I just sort of going back to when you were sitting in your physics class. So, you know, the beginning, she's just being dropped off. You know, her mother says goodbye, pretty much like, goodbye, here you go, and kind of abandons her at her grandparents' door. So that's a pretty, you know, I just, even when I read it, it was so painful and sad. And then to think of you in your physics class writing that.
And only twice old. That's the part that's really amazing, because Nori is 8 when this happens to her, and here's Asha at 16 imagining that. You know, how did you tap into that feeling of abandonment? I mean, I think that's a remarkable, perhaps that's too personal a question, and if it is, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. No, I mean, I think, you know, for me, I have always felt like I didn't really quite fit in. I was kind of the weird kid. I didn't really have any friends. But I read a lot of books. So they were kind of my friends. So I think I was able to combine, you know, like a negative, which was the feeling of being lonely and isolated, with positive of crafting the kind of thing that like would have made me feel better to read.
So can you talk a little bit about the grandmother? She is so, I don't even know what the word would be. She's so tough and mean. We'll just say mean.
She is mean, but she has her reasons in her own mind.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is the grandmother the way she is? How do you feel that she changes, or if she changes? And then certainly when Akira, you know, shows up, how does that affect how she looks, you know, at everything?
So I think Yuko is very much kind of a product of her time and her environment. And she's definitely like the antagonist in the story, the bad guy, if you will. But I still think that she kind of fascinates me, to be honest. I think the best villains don't see themselves as villains. And I think that describes her very well. She really is a true believer. She really believes that she is like divinely appointed to make sure that her family is prosperous and stays in power, the power she believes that they are entitled to. Mm-hmm. And even though the laws have changed, and you know, the whole concept of aristocracy is kind of crumbling, not just in Japan, but kind of across the world after World War II. People were kind of not really impressed with that whole concept of some people being born better than others. And I think she just is not willing to let it go. She's also a woman in a man's world. And I think that's made her cold. I think it's made her feel like she has to be extra ruthless or no one is going to take her seriously. Mm-hmm. Akira, sorry.
I was going to say, does she really trust her husband to look after the family in the way that she thinks it ought to be looked after?
No, that's her job because it's her family by blood. She's the Kamiza. Her husband is just her husband. So he took her name, which is very uncommon at the time. But sometimes it would happen that if you only had one daughter and you wanted the family name to continue, that would be part of the marriage contract, would be that the husband would take your name and then the children would take your name as well.
But also there is that aspect in Japanese culture of sort of the inside world and the outside world,
Yes,
you know,
definitely.
the outside world for men, but the inside world within the four walls of your house, or, you know,
Yes.
in this case, this gorgeous estate really belongs to the women.
Yes.
And who really can exert real power within that. And it's not like she's going out into the world to pull the strings that she pulls. She's really doing it inside in a very, I mean, I guess you could say typically female manipulative way, but even in a kind of heightened way. But I also, I don't know, were you thinking about that aspect of Japanese culture?
I was, and I was also thinking about that kind of universal tendency where men are allowed to kind of live their lives out loud, whereas women kind of have to play things closer to the vest. You know, women have always had influence on events. They just weren't allowed to do it overtly, so they had to do it covertly. It was very behind the scenes. And there's also this whole concept in Japanese culture, but in a lot of cultures, the idea of being ladylike.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be put together, you have to be poised, and you know, you can't feel those negative, ugly things. You know, nobody wants to see that. So I think Yuko has really internalized a lot of that. And I think she really tries to push that onto Nori's mother and then to Nori, but it doesn't work because these women are of two different generations. And I think a lot of that is starting to wear off, but she just can't, she's stuck in a time warp. She just refuses to accept that things have changed.
So we've sort of touched on it a little bit. I know I sound like I'm jumping around a little bit, but I guess I am. But did you go to Japan to do research?
So I've been to Japan many times as a kid and then also as an adult. I have my two favorite aunties are both Japanese. And I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time there, and it's a beautiful country. And I'm actually supposed to be there right now, but I can't get in because of Corona. But I'm working on another novel set in Japan, a part of Japan that I actually have not been to. So I am planning a research trip for that book, and hopefully it can happen sooner rather than later.
So
Could I just ask her, what part of Japan are you looking at that you're not familiar with?
So I have not been, it's called Nara. It's famous for deer.
Yeah.
I've been there. I have not only been there, but stayed at the famous hotel. In fact, I have a hilarious story I could tell later on, where Laurie King actually got us a room in the Hotel Nara by trading on the fact that she was a famous author.
Oh my goodness. That is
really,
really funny.
It's very close to Kyoto.
It is, I know, but I just like, for some reason, I've never actually made it there. Like the last time I was there, my cousins and I were like, oh, we should do a day trip. And it just like didn't happen. So I really just want to spend like some time there and internalize as much as I can for this book.
It's a beautiful city. It was the original capital before Kyoto, before currently Tokyo. So there's a very nice thread that comes on. I'm sorry, Lisa, I interrupted, but I was really interested to know where it was that she was going to go next.
Yeah, and I actually, there's some other things I want to follow up on what you said, but I do, before I forget, I do want to ask, about the estate, this home. And this is why I'd asked you if you had done research in Japan. Is that actually modeled on a real place, or did you take different places that you've been to kind of create this?
So it's like a conglomeration. It's not a specific place. It is based off of different places that I've seen, and I kind of put this one place together. And I thought that, it reminded me of when I watched these documentaries on famous like palaces and buildings that people put all of this effort and time and money into, and it's to immortalize themselves. Even after they're long dead, it's like, I was here and I was powerful, and I really kind of wanted to create something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to go visit that house. So I know you just touched on the pandemic, and I know this is off this book a little bit, but well, maybe not that much. I mean, your book came out now in the pandemic. It is your first novel. Do you even have a sense of how that's affected, what you could do, how you reach people? I mean, this is, just to begin with, it's your debut novel, but in any situation, it's hard to get that first book out. So what have you been doing, and how has the publisher sort of been thinking about getting you out there? I mean, apart from being here tonight with Barbara and Poison Pen.
Well, I'm still kind of like in awe that this book has connected with so many readers. I just think that is not something I really could have predicted. You never really know what's gonna take off. And I was nervous because, like I said, this really isn't the kind of story that I've read before. And because of that, I didn't really have anything to go on to be like, okay, well, it's kind of like this, and so maybe this could happen. It was like unique, and I think that can be a bad thing or it can be a good thing. It just depends. And I got lucky. And I hope that I have 2 more books in the works, and I'm hoping I have the opportunity to get to like touch on some of those same themes, but just from a different angle. And hopefully I will also be able to get out of this country sooner rather than later to go do more research.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this is something I'm struggling with too. I just sent off my new novel to my editor, 2 weeks ago. I still will have some work to do on it. But the book that I thought I was going to be writing next, I've been slowly collecting material for it for the last couple of years. I can't do it because it was going to require a trip deep into China's interior. There's no way I'll be able to do it next year. Pretty unlikely that it'll even be 2022.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, a lot of the like research libraries and archives that I usually go to here are still closed. So I think this is going to present a real challenge for people like us who do kind of historical novels, because going to the place, having access to materials, and getting into archives, it's so important. And once that's completely cut off, I'm like, I wonder if I could have a historical novel on Mars. Nobody's been there. So, but I mean, I think it's going to be a real challenge for writers like us in these coming years. Because again, we don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, we don't. And it's, I guess you technically don't have to go to a place, I don't want to imply that, because not everyone can, has access to be able to travel and stay somewhere for weeks on end. And, when I was writing this, I relied a lot on people close to me who had a lot more intimate knowledge of Japan than I did. And I also relied on a lot of books and a lot of documentaries. So, yes, I was able to go, but that was only one piece of the puzzle. So while I do think it is possible, I plan on just making as much progress as I can on my new book. which takes place in Paris, New York, and Cuba.
And
And
Nara. And Nara.
no,
Or just
not
another one.
the other book. I'm writing two. But I am just planning on like doing as much as I can on it. And then like I'll be able to travel when I travel. You know, can't stop the wheels entirely.
So can we talk about the sort of mixed race elements and the racism elements in the novel? I don't have a particular question, but I just hope you could talk a little bit about that.
So the idea of being mixed race is a very easy to understand, simple manifestation of having being other. You know, the idea that you are not enough of one thing to fit in the neat little boxes that society is so obsessed with. It makes it difficult to classify. And I think for Nori, especially in the 40s, in such a homogenous place as Japan, for her to not only be mixed race, but also to be mixed with a race that has now given her obviously darker skin, that is a big.
Well, in a country, in a culture that also prizes that, you know,
fair
kind of
complexion,
fair,
yeah,
porcelain, you know,
it definitely marks her out as different. There's no hiding it. You know, perhaps if she had been mixed with, if her father had been white, I'm guessing things would have been easier for her. She still would have been the child of a foreigner, but she wouldn't have been so obviously different.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was going to ask you, in fact, whether you felt the grandmother. I mean, she's illegitimate, so that's a strike against her. Her father is not Japanese. That's another strike against her from her grandmother's standpoint. And then there is the obvious, racial difference. In fact, her grandmother tries to bathe her in bleach in order to make her skin fair. But I wondered which of those you thought, or were any of those primary, or was it a cluster of all of those elements that made it so difficult for grandma? I mean, Japan was the most conforming society. So you can see that Nuri was a real triple threat to well, she really is, to what her grandmother
it's a disaster in every possible way.
Yeah. And I guess you should maybe say a few words about her mother. And let me say before you do that, Lisa, one of the reasons that I thought you would like this book before I sent you my copy, and that I wanted you to talk to Asha and me, is that I still remember in Snowflower how chilling it was that when the foot binding thing is going on, that one of the things you bring out is the fact that the mothers and the grandmothers, having suffered it themselves, didn't want to excuse felt that their daughters had to go through it too. It's like, we didn't get a pass, so you don't get a pass. Mm-hmm. And I wondered to what extent Nori's grandmother feels like that too. She has had to conform. She has had to, try to keep the family together. And I think she'd be hard on anybody, but particularly hard on somebody that was so outstanding, an example of all the things that she doesn't want to happen. So maybe you could both talk about that, because I've never forgotten that, Lisa. I came away from the book still thinking about that. How hard are we as mothers on our daughters?
Well, I mean, yes, it's about conforming, and I had to do it, and now you have to do it. But I always felt that there was another element to this, which I feel, works with this book as well, is that this was the one thing a mother could do to possibly give her daughter a better chance at life. If she could give her daughter a pair of perfectly bound feet, then she could marry into a better family, have a better life. And that's the undercurrent, or a main current throughout 50 Words for Rain, because the grandmother obviously had intentions for her daughter to marry well, to keep the family going, to keep the family prosperous, to keep the family, even elevate the family status if she could. And then, obviously things don't work out quite the way the grandmother planned. But that I do think there's an element of conforming, but that other element of increase, you want your daughter to do well. You want for her to have this better life. And I think that's true for the grandmother. I mean, as far as her daughter goes, until her daughter gets, pregnant and has an illegitimate baby, as you pointed out. But also about kind of elevating the family as well. That it's not just about her and conforming for her own sake. It's about, preserving and elevating her family. I don't know. What do you think, Asha? Is that, am I just totally off?
No, I mean,
in my own head about what you wrote?
No, I definitely think that was it for a lot of women. And if you look at like an example in the modern world, the female genital mutilation,
exactly,
it's not performed by men. It's performed by women who had it done to them, and now they're doing it to their daughters. Because that's if they don't do it, they'll be shunned and they won't find a husband, and they believe that that's the most important thing. So I think it comes from a misguided place, but a place of love in a way. But I think for Hugo, I don't think it's that. I think Hugo is just obsessed with power and image, and it's okay. So it's three things, right? So she's illegitimate, which is embarrassing. But if Nori's mother had at least had an affair with another Japanese man, they might have been able to cover that up. They might have been able to pass that child off as, just the child born within that prearranged marriage. And then she has a child with an American, and Americans were not at all popular in Japan at this time. And then number three, she has a child with someone with a darker complexion than what Japanese people have. And so it's just like it can't be hidden. This is obviously the child of a foreigner, and so I think Nori is being punished basically just for being embarrassing, but she's also being punished because her mother is not there to punish. So Nori just gets all of it, and it's really unfair to her. But luckily Akira comes along, and he doesn't punish her for the sins of others.
I wanted to ask about Akira. So was he in your, he doesn't appear till pretty far into the novel. So was that someone that you thought of all the way back when you were 16? How did he appear, and how did he evolve for you?
So I always knew that I couldn't write a whole novel about this girl being confined to an attic and not having anyone to talk to. Eventually I could open it that way, but eventually I was going to have to kind of expand her world. So I bring Akira in, and he is really her escape. He is her door into the outside world. So I think that is, I think more novels need to have sibling relationships, because I just think that they're so complex and fascinating, and I have always loved them, but they're kind of hard to come by, especially brother-sister relationships. It's like you can have sister-sister, or you get brother-brother, but brother-sister is pretty rare.
And do you have a brother?
I do. I have a little brother, which is a different dynamic. It's less, I'm going to protect you, and more, I'm going to put dead things in your shoes.
So with Akira, were you, I mean, he was very interesting to me, because in some ways he's quite open-minded, but in other ways he does have, I think, some of the, almost like the strictness of the grandmother. I mean, that he's rejecting it, but he's also really embracing certain aspects of it.
Yeah, so I think, this is the conundrum of being open-minded and somewhat of a radical, being of the younger generation, but also being immensely privileged and not wanting to walk away from that.
Mhm.
So I think, I think Akira, he does not believe that, Nori is worthless or useless, and he doesn't think it's fair that she's basically blamed for what their mother did. And I also think he could really give a toss about this whole idea of dynasty. He just thinks that that's outdated. He just wants to play his violin and prove himself as worthy on his own talent and his own merit. But this is also someone who has constantly been assured that they are extremely special just for existing.
Right.
This is someone who is rich, who will never really have to work, who will never really have to struggle. And I think that maybe he doesn't want to admit it, but he is comfortable with certain aspects of the privilege, even if he resents the limitations that are placed on him by it. And I think this is a conundrum that a lot of people who are born into privilege face. On the one hand, you kind of want to do your own thing, and I don't want to have my destiny plotted out for me. But on the other hand, it's really hard to give all of that up and to walk away, because you walk away from that, you're also walking away from your family.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you talked about that the middle section was challenging for you. I think I could speak for all writers everywhere to say that the middle section is always challenging. But this was your first novel, and so and I just think, we don't know who's watching tonight, but there might be people out there who are thinking about writing writing their first novel. And so how did you kind of approach that when you hit these difficult, a section that was difficult for you? And was that something you did on your own? What was your relationship like with your editor? Again, and since it's your first novel, the one thing that's nice once you've done a few of these is you've been down the road before, right? And so you know that, oh yes, I can fix it, or forget it, I'll never be able to fix it, but maybe these other people can help me.
I am hoping that that it will get easier for me. So I wrote the middle like probably 4 times by myself, and then I wrote it another, I guess, half time when I got my agent. And then when we got to the part where I actually had an editor, I'm sorry, that is my cat. It was really not as bad. It was mainly just figuring out how to like the pacing, right? So pacing is tough when you're writing a novel that spans so many years. You want it to feel immersive, but you don't want to like dwell on what she has for breakfast every Wednesday morning, because no one cares. So it's choosing what to put in, what to leave, how much of one thing to put in, and you want it to feel like natural. So I think that just comes with practice.
And so with your editor, and I guess with your agent as well, again, I'm just sort of speaking to the people out there who are starting to write. Editing is just one of the most difficult. It never gets easier. And it's just one of the most difficult things, because for one thing, we do feel like we're being criticized, right? Like, I didn't get it right the first time. What do you mean? And also like, but I love that part. So again, for you, for your first time, I think people would really love to hear how you sort of dealt with that, whether it was from your agent or from your editor, or if you were in a writer's group or anything like that, and how those, well, I'll just say, I did mention that I just turned in the new book, and I have 4 people who read it simultaneously.
Ooh.
and they all read for different things, and I mean that because everybody's different, right? So everybody reads a little differently. But I did have a conversation with my sister and my agent the other day where they were saying, well, we could send you our notes now, but we don't want you to change anything until you talk to your editor. And I was like, well, don't worry, I'm not going to change anything until I talk to her, because I'm not going to do all that work and then find out, she really liked this and not that, or what, how all that works. But the idea that you can have people give you different ideas or make different kinds of suggestions that can really be kind of polar opposite. So I just wondered how that was for you with first your agent and then your editor.
Well, luckily for me, my agent and my editor think very similarly. So there was never like this big push and pull. I think that would have been really tough to deal with. But it did sting a little when I got the first round of edits from my editor. I was like, wow, I am the worst writer in the world. It it kind of makes you feel like dumb a little, because she'd be like, you used this word like 92 times. And I'm like, oh, did I? I didn't notice that. I wrote this over the course of several years. I really did not notice, but that's why you need an editor. It's super critical, and you can't take it personally, because you have to remember, I kind of look at it like when your parents criticize you. Most of the time, they're not doing it just because they like criticizing you. They're doing it because they want you to be the best you can be, and they want you to improve. So I look at it that way. At the end of the day, we all have the same goal, which is to put the best book out there that we possibly can. We are all on the same team, and part of any good team is someone who is going to be harsh and who's going to be honest. I don't really need people to just tell me that I'm the best thing since sliced bread all the time. I want their honest opinion, because that's how you improve.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't change either. It doesn't matter which number book you're on. I think that's the idea. I just think it gets a little easier in some ways as you go along, with successive books, because you're right, we're all on the same team and everybody wants to make something better. But there is that part where you just think, I am the worst writer ever.
The entire world.
I don't know how to fix it, but I like that word. And all those kinds of things that we have to sort of navigate. But it gets easier in some ways, and in some ways the hard part of it stays exactly the same.
Well, can I intervene for a moment here as an actual editor? There are several things that you learn when you edit authors, one of which is that every author in every book has a tick word. There is a word, I kid you not, and and it's never going to be the same word in every book, but there's just something, and you're unconscious of it, because it feels right to you, but it shows up. And when you're writing, I expected editing to be different than it mostly turned out to be. And one of the things that I recognized working on a book was that if you're writing a book over a long period of time, you wind up telling yourself parts of the story over again, because you're now distant from it and you might not remember that you've already said that. Whereas if you're reading the whole book in a relatively tight time frame, then those repetitions show up. And then a question is, where is it the most valuable? Where does this information go the best? Does it go here at the beginning, or do you stick it in whatever? And I think I sort of naively thought, and even though I've been a reader for 70 years now, that the final book was more or less the final book. And what you learn as an editor and what you learn as an author is the book that's finally published is not necessarily the book that you started out with, because there are a lot of things that happen, whereas readers only get the final version. They don't know all of those things that went into it. And so I've become, I hope, a better reader, having become, after editing. And it is hard when you try to say that to an author and the author gets upset with you. And my reaction is the same as both of yours, which is we're just trying to make this the best book it can be. It's not personal.
Yeah.
And it's never meant to make
Not at all.
anybody feel stupid, but if you're not tough, and the only time I let myself down, it was a wonderful author who had published with a major publishing company, and we did a book together. And I absolutely knew it was going wrong, and I did my best, and he absolutely would not make it a change. And then the New York Times reviewed the book, and the last line of the review was,
Oh,
he's a better writer and he should have listened to his editor. And I thought, oh God, and then he wrote to me and he said, I'm really sorry I didn't listen to it. It's too late. The book has
you
already
should
been.
listen to your editor. You should. That's
But
why
the
you love them.
lesson, yeah, but the
But
lesson.
there are also times when you have to stick to your guns and
Yes.
something that you really like. Actually, that happened. Oh, I can't remember if it was Island of Sea Women or the one before, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, but there was a line that my editor and I wouldn't say we argued, but we disagreed. And I just was like, but I have to keep it. And she was, oh, all right, but I don't like it. I don't think you need it and whatever. And actually that was a line that they used in the New York Times book review. And she was very gracious because she called me right away and she said, you were right about that line. But meanwhile, I was sitting here like, I was right about that. Feeling very smug for a second. But of course, there are all the other things that somebody makes a suggestion and you make the change, and then they get to feel a little smug too.
Well, ultimately it is your book, and no matter how strongly an editor may feel, in the end, it is your book, and you get to decide. Basically, all editorial stuff is suggestion. It can't really be a command.
No.
So
I think I conceded to my editor like 95% of the time. It was like 5% of things that she was like, would this character really do this? And I'm like, yes. Yes, they would, because I have known this character for 10 years in my head, and I'm saying yes.
Excellent. Let me check with Patrick. Do we have any questions or just comments over here? All right, Patrick is going to step up with a couple of questions that have come in from the Facebook audience.
Okay, Asha, one question is, other than writing and going back to Japan, what are some of your favorite things to do?
I like to bake. And I am a massive fan of the classical performing arts, so opera, ballet, orchestras, all of that. None of which I can partake in person right now because of COVID. But I have been watching, you can stream operas at the Met online. So that is really fun, and I totally recommend it.
All right, let's see, Sarah asks, Asha, where did you go to college and what did you study? Obviously not physics. LOL.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? I only heard the end.
Where did you go to college and what did you study?
Still can't hear.
Can't hear.
I can repeat it. Where did you go to college? What did you study? Clearly not physics.
No, not physics at all. I got a C in physics and I was grounded. But it was worth it, I think. So I studied English at Boston College and I minored in history. So, English, history, historical fiction. And now here I am. I definitely am glad that I chose to study English despite people trying to devalue the liberal arts and tell me that I wouldn't find a job and that I should do something more practical. I think you have to do what you love in life and let the chips fall where they may.
Good for you. Is one of the books you're working on a sequel to 50 Words for Rain?
Yes.
That
Yes.
probably is the one in Nara.
Yes.
Yes, clever, right. Lisa, can you fill us in at all about the book you've turned in, or is it too early to talk about it?
Oh, I can happily talk about it. You know, I may not work on a book as long as you have, Asha, but I do think about them for a really, really long time before I decide this is the one. And actually, the one that I just finished, I've been thinking about for as long as you've been alive. So 26 years. And I don't know how that makes me feel, actually, now that I'm saying that out loud. But 26 years ago, when my grandmother died, I found in her belongings a diary written by her mother, so my great-grandmother. Born
Wow.
on a homestead in South Dakota. The family continued west, homesteaded again in Washington State. She got pregnant very young, had to get married, and she and her husband, my great-grandfather, had very, very, very hard lives. They were itinerant workers from Alaska down to the Mexican border. And so, you know, I think on the surface, this seems very different than anything I've written before. It is my first sort of 100% American story.
Yeah.
But to me, it fits right in with what I've been doing all along, which is trying to tell these moments of history, but through the eyes of women. I mean, with the historical novels, not the mysteries, obviously. So it's been a really different story for me to write, and you know, very different kinds of research. Instead of going to China or Korea or whatever, you know, to just go to South Dakota. It's like actually in some ways more foreign to me, and you know, it's not my world. And it was very interesting to sort of be out there in the heartland in these really small villages. I did go back to the original homesteads where, you know, that whole side of the family was from. And actually, this sort of touches on something that I had as one of my questions. It's not really a question necessarily, but the idea of people getting pregnant, you know, when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And that's a lot, you know, I was just thinking about it today because I am sort of thinking about what I could write next, and, you know, with all the complications of COVID and the restrictions on travel and different ways to research. And as I was sort of thinking about different books that I've written, I've had a lot of people who get pregnant who shouldn't. And that, you know, that automatically is almost historical because,
Yeah,
you know, today I mean, there's birth control for one thing, and, you know, people could go get an abortion, and, you know, it's just such a different time that to actually use that as a part of your plot, really, I mean, it can work, but it would be much harder to do that in a contemporary story.
I
And
think
so in this way, it's like ways that lives for women have really changed, and the, you know, the stigma and the way you have to hide it and all of those kinds of things that are so great for novelists.
Well, that's, I think, why I like historical fiction, because I am really just fascinated by this idea. And it was always the woman who would really suffer the most.
Who pays the price.
It was like massively disproportionate, like women impregnate themselves. But, you know, I think too, we've become more outwardly tolerant as a society. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, that was always one of the major deterrents for women to have any kind of relationship outside of a traditional marriage, because you're the one who's going to get pregnant, and that's going to wreck your life if it's not in the right circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And also make life terrible for the child if it's the wrong circumstances too. So it's not just the woman that suffers from it. Asha, I was interested. I listened to a little bit of a program you did with Fiona Davis, whom I'm very fond of, and I think is a wonderful writer. And one of the questions she asked you was about research. And I was interested that you said, in addition to a friend who was a big help for you in terms of writing about Japan, that you watched a lot of documentaries. And it seemed to me that would be a really useful thing. But I'm telling you, YouTube is absolutely solid.
I know, and they're all free. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I also I am subscribed to, even though I live in America most of the time, I have purchased the BBC like subscriptions. So I watch all of the BBC documentaries, and it's actually kind of funny. I can't tell you what song is like on the radio right now, but I can tell you some random event that happened like 300 years ago, because that's just kind of where my interests lie.
Well, well, museums and cultural institutions have really knocked themselves out, on their websites to do. You can tour the Louvre, you can go to Versailles, you
So
can.
cool. It's
There are
really amazing.
a bunch of artists. I mean, some museums have done an amazing job putting on shows right now that you can walk through. I think in a way, more people may be visiting them than we're able to. In the same way that a lot of the feedback we've had about these virtual events is that people who were never ever going to be able to travel here or never meet you in person, either because of distance or economics or age or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
Has brought a bigger audience into the book world and into your books than might have been possible. So,
Well, if there was a positive from this whole thing, I think it would be that.
absolutely, this technology came along at a magical moment.
It really
For,
did.
and I'm hopeful going forward that we can keep a combination of this. But I really thought that that your use of documentaries as a research tool has been greatly expanded in the last year or two by so many things getting their virtual act together. So, it may be possible to do more
I've been
research.
using YouTube since like 2009
Yeah.
to watch documentaries. Yeah. And I have to say, almost anything that I haven't been able to find for free, I can get on iTunes or like PBS. Like I can always find it somewhere.
Of course, you miss the smells and you miss so many different things. There probably aren't too many YouTube films in interior China, are there, Lisa? So,
Actually, there's a surprising amount of stuff that you can find. And also, really another really great resource is the Library of Congress. And,
Yeah.
and so much of their stuff is now available online. And again, wonderful documentaries. Actually, for me, some of the things that have helped me the most are like these old CIA tapes. Like they snuck in China before, when it was still closed, and in like 1952, and they would, I don't know where they had their camera, just sort of, I don't know how they were doing it, but there are quite a few they're not technically documentaries. They were just done by the CIA and have ended up in the Library of Congress.
well, we're lucky that there are all these great resources, and I think it's easy to fall down the rabbit hole of YouTube and never come out. So,
Oh, definitely. I've stayed up until 5 o'clock in the morning that way.
right. Well, ladies, it's been a real pleasure to introduce you to each other, but also to talk with you. Thank you both for spending time with us. Lisa has been kind enough to sign all of her books for us over the years, so I hope when her new book publishes, we'll be able to do that. And as far as Asha goes, I remind you that we still have some signed first printings, which are quite rare at this point, of 50 Words for Rain. So we encourage you to buy one to support her and say thank you. For a debut author, it really does depend on readers and word of mouth as much as anything else to reach an audience. So, it's wonderful. Anyway, thank you for spending time with us. And I want to thank all of you who've been watching for spending part of your evening with us. Good night.